for a few reasons. Without free will, there really is very little way of talking about morality. Is a person moral or immoral is basically an irrelevant question. Okay, we missed the first part. Okay, is an irrelevant question because if the person's actions were determined by something outside of themselves, or were determined by basic instinct, or were determined completely by something, forces, genetic or otherwise, then they cannot be praised for the good they do, they cannot be condemned for the evil that they do. Of course, people take a convenient route here, and if they do something good, they want praise for it. It's an act that I chose to do, and therefore I should be praised. If they do something bad, it's because of my parents, my teachers, my diet, my environment, the cell phone, whatever it happens to be. It's everything else. It's just what's convenient. I remember to people, I was the Rabbi on the army base in Bethlehem, and I'm standing outside waiting for a hitch back home. Had my rule was you have to have your gun out, at the ready. So I'm standing there, I usually am obedient, so I had my gun at the ready, and there's a guy comes out of the base. He's got his gun behind his back, he's got a backpack over his gun, the magazine is in his pocket, and he's got 2 plastic bags, sakiot nylon, in each hand. Right? I look at him, I say it's going to take him 10 minutes to get his gun at the ready. You have to ask the terrorist, do you mind just waiting a few minutes? Right, it's unbelievable. So I said to him, Chaver, my friend, but you are supposed to have your gun at the ready. This is a dangerous area, and you're endangering both of us with this. And he says, He says, if God wants you to die, the gun's not going to help. If he doesn't want you to die, you don't need the gun. So before I was able to brilliantly refute him, I hear the diesel engine of an Egged bus coming around the corner, so I run like a maniac for the Egged bus stop, because they will not stop unless you're at the stop. If they see you running, they may slow down so as not to discourage you completely, but they won't stop. All right. So anyway, I get to the bus stop, I get on the bus, and behind me I hear wheezing, like someone's about to die, and I see it's the guy with all the bags. So we sit down together, the only 2 seats left, and I said to him, you ran for the bus? He says, of course. I said, what do you mean? If God wanted you to get the bus, you have got it without running. If God did not want you to get the bus, running would not have helped. So he says, ani lo dati. I'm not religious. I said, what do you mean? I said, a minute ago you were so religious you were willing to die. You're willing to put yourself in danger because you were so religious. The answer is very simple. When it's convenient, he's religious. When it's not convenient, he's not religious. When it's convenient, we blame it on environment, genetics, and so on and so forth. When it's inconvenient, when it's convenient, we say it's free will. But we understand that morality requires free will. We do not condemn dolphins for torturing harbour seals as they do on a regular basis, even though they don't eat them, they just torture them for the heck of it. Right? We don't condemn them. The United Nations, Human Rights Council, chaired by who is it now? Libya, China, I don't know who, some expert in human rights abuse. So they don't condemn the dolphins because the dolphins are creatures of instinct, and consequently it is not really an act of free will, so there's no morality to be discussed here. In addition, Maimonides tells us in Guide for the Perplexed that when we are told that we are B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God, this doesn't have visual connotations, but rather what it means is that as God has free will, chooses to do that ratzon, he has an unbound will, a ratzon, so the human being, similar to God, is created with this ability to choose. And that is really what makes a human being a human. Obviously, life, when you think about it, would be a little futile if everything was predetermined, would be a little meaningless, and which is why Groucho Marx once said that we have to believe in free will, there is no choice. So anyway, what I'd like to look at today are a few of the challenges to free will, both internal, external, questions that people often ask and have asked me, and how to deal with it. So let me start with the first question, which is not really a great question, but I actually have been asked this question. The question is the following. Free will means I make my own decisions. However, Judaism teaches us that there are certain things which are absolutely wrong, and there are some severe consequences to transgression, and there are certain things which are good, and there are rewards for fulfilling them. So, inasmuch as that's so, how do I have free will? God says, if you do this, this is, etc. And if you do that, this. So where's my free will? I hope you don't understand this question, because it's not. But the question is confusing. In the words of Rabbi God, it's confusing two things. It's confusing free will authority with free will power. Meaning, free will power means I have the power to choose between that which is good and that which is evil. Free will authority means I determine what is good and what is evil. That we don't have. I don't have the authority, maybe I do, not you, right? But we don't have the authority to determine that something is good or evil. That is determined by God. That is an objective determination by God. This is good, that is evil. However, what I do have is the power to choose between that objective good, that objective evil. Is this clear? And indeed, the alternative, which is the idea that I have free will authority, means that anything I choose by virtue of the fact that I chose it is good, which means there's no such thing as morality. Unfortunately, this is a bit of a common belief. People will always, not always, but I have heard the argument used frequently that he's so sincere. I say, what sincerity doesn't prove anything, and sincerity does not make something correct or right. I remember I was giving this class somewhere, I think it was in Australia, and there was a member of the audience who was a Holocaust survivor, and he said, what do you mean? He says, I'm here alive today because I found an insincere Nazi. He said, yeah. He says, there's a Nazi I was able to bribe. Had he been sincere, I wouldn't have been able to bribe him. He said, what do you mean? So I can't accept a bribe, I have to kill you. Right? He said, the fact is, he was insincere. Thank God he was insincere. So I was able to bribe him, I survived. So we have to understand that not to confuse free will power, which we do have, with free will authority, which we do not have. Question number 2. God created the world. He creates the world. He apparently continuously creates the world, so apparently everything is therefore must be predestined or fated, that it should be so. And in various religions you have various degrees of belief in determinism, in fate. In Islam there was a huge debate about it. The fatalists won out, which I think created the decline of Islamic society. But again, we have a belief in free will. How do you reconcile that with the fact that God created and continues to create the world? And there's two components to the question. One is that surely things are predestined, and there seem to be statements in the sages of the Talmud that would indicate that. For example, very famously, Sotah 2b, the Gemara says, Babylonian Talmud says that 40 days before the conception of a child, a voice from heaven says, so-and-so will marry so-and-so. You ever heard that one? Very famous. Okay, so Maimonides was asked about this. There's a set of 3 responsa in Maimonides, some of the few which are written in Hebrew, as opposed to the rest which are written in Arabic or Judeo-Arabic. But these are written in Hebrew because they were written to a convert, Ovadia, who was there were a number of famous converts called Ovadia. This convert was an Arab who converted to Judaism, as opposed to the Norman convert Ovadia from Italy, Bari in Italy, and as opposed to the prophet Ovadia, who was a convert from Edom. So this is a convert who was a Muslim, and he has 3 questions he addresses to Maimonides. Maimonides answers him back. It's interesting because he writes in Hebrew. Here is a guy who grew up as an Arab, as a Muslim, and all 95% of Maimonides' responses are written in Arabic. And the 3 times he writes in Hebrew is to a guy whose native language is Arabic. So the answer is sensitivity. The guy converted to Judaism. Maimonides specifically, Bedafka, addresses him in Hebrew as if to say, what's the term? My peeps or something like that, whatever. Anyway, American terminology. So as if to say, you are my brother, and therefore I'm speaking to you in Hebrew. Okay. So, but this is what this convert asks. He says, is it not predetermined? Maimonides says, impossible for this to be predetermined. It makes no sense. He says, first of all, it's a moral choice. Whom you marry is a choice of morality. When it says everything's in the hands of heaven except for the fear of heaven, is not a choice of marriage a fear of heaven choice? There are people it's prohibited to marry. There are occasions where it's obligatory to marry a specific person, yibum, and there are people who it's permitted to marry. What that means is it's a moral choice. If it's a moral choice, how could you possibly say that it's predetermined? Not only that, but from the Torah itself, it's clear that it's not predetermined. The Torah says that when the Jewish army goes to war, what does the Kohen, the chaplain, say? He says anyone who is engaged or betrothed and it's in should go home lest he die and someone else will now marry this woman. What do you mean? If it was predetermined that this couple would be married, then there's no problem. If it wasn't right? So, and in addition, the Talmud says, even though there are certain times of the year, times of mourning, where we're not supposed to do celebrations, no weddings, etc., but engagements you can always do. Why? Why can you do an engagement? The Gemara says, Shema yikadmenu acher. It says, if you found who you believe to be the right woman, you found who you believe to be the right man, then that's it. Propose. If he's got cold feet, you propose to him. Whatever. But propose, right? Because you've got to do the engagement. Who knows? Someone else may engage this person. So therefore, what we see is it wasn't predetermined. It's a matter of human free will. What does it mean when the Gemara says 40 days before? Maimonides says that refers to special, unique circumstances, not for most people, but for very, very unique, unusual situations and individuals. This is something which will, indeed, God will arrange. They'll meet from one end of the world to the other, and they'll eventually meet. But even there, it doesn't mean that he will determine their choice of whether they will marry or not. That is still up to human free will. In addition, another component to this question is the idea, and there's a lot of discussion about this, but another component of this question is that surely if God, this is a slightly more sophisticated question, but it's if God is willing the world into existence at this very moment, surely that means that everything that I do, that my hand, which I pick up in order to slap this person, innocent person, doesn't deserve a slap. No one really. I mean, right? I slap this innocent person. So who is sustaining me and who is giving me the power and the life to do this? God, right? So that means, so God wills that I exist. God's willing that my hand has this type of strength. And when I slap this person, surely you could argue that it's God's willing it. So here, an answer is that there's a hierarchy of wants. God wants A, God wants B, God wants C, but there are certain things which are high priority. In other words, he wants me to have free will more than he wants me not to slap this guy. So therefore, he will actually, he wills that I may exist and gives me the power to do so, even though I've made the wrong choice. I'll give you an example. There are parents here, probably, right? So, you could easily set up webcams all over your house and you tell the kids, listen, I'm going out. I'm telling you, do not take any cookies whatsoever. It's an hour before supper. You will ruin your appetite. And the kid says, all right, fine. And I walk outside and I check out on my webcam, right? I have a look and I see he's going to the cookie jar. So I go, back away from the cookie jar now. Keep your hands where I can see them, right, etc. Right, now, I don't do this in my house, I'm not, So, now you see, that would be an effective way of actually stopping him from having the biscuits, cookies, sorry, you call them. Right, so, however, I do not want him to have the biscuits, but more than I don't want him to have the biscuits, I want him to make the decision not to have the biscuits because I said not to, not because the webcam is watching. You understand this? Right? It's good parenting, I think. Right? It is good parenting to allow, because I want him to make this decision himself. I'm prepared to sacrifice his appetite tonight for the ability to give him the power to make his own decisions and to overcome his evil inclination. And so, not that it's that evil to have a cookie, but I mean, so to overcome that inclination and to learn self-control. So that's the same is true here. And obviously, even, the marriage choice, etc. Again, it could work out in different ways, not necessarily fated, and hence free will exists there as well. That's challenge number 2. Challenge number 3. This is a difficult one, and this is asked by many, which is God knows the future, inasmuch as he knows the future, and he cannot be wrong. So therefore, if he knows that I will choose A as opposed to B, it's not possible for me to choose B, because that would mean that God was wrong, and that cannot be. So how can I have free will here? This is a problematic question. There's no great answers to this question. I will point out that the Rambam's way of dealing with it is the following. The Rambam says, strictly speaking, we can't really describe God. Right? It's what we call negative theology. The best we can do is say what he's not. That's pretty much all the descriptions of God in the Torah. The way the Rambam, Maimonides, understands it, understands them, they are descriptions really what God is not as opposed to what he is. Because describing God would mean that we have somehow, our mind has somehow comprehended him, which is not possible, as Ibn Gvirol puts it, ilu yedativ hayitiv, which means if I'd know him, I'd be him. Because the only way to know him is to have this infinite mind, and the only way to have the infinite mind is to be God himself. So he says it's really... Now, that's stage one. Stage two is God. One of the things we know about God is he's not plural, i.e. oneness. Shema Yisrael, Hear O Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Hashem is absolute oneness. That means, as opposed to, let's say, with us, you can say, this is me, and this is what I know, and that's my knowledge about this, that's my knowledge about that. You can actually distinguish between myself and knowledge. With God, we cannot make distinctions and say this is God, and this is what he knows, and etc. There's no such thing. So it's because he's a complete and total unity, which means in the same way that I can't comprehend God himself, I can't comprehend what it means when we say God knows. Okay? So, because that would be trying to say, explaining or comprehending or even wrapping our minds around God. So he's beyond all conception and understanding. So Maimonides says, if that's true, he says, then what do we mean when we say God knows the future? That's a statement about God's essence, because knows is not separate from God. It's his future, it's his essence. So I can't describe that. If I can't describe that, I can't really explain or ask the question. So only our type of knowledge, human knowledge, if we're anthropomorphizing, i.e. we're attributing human characteristics to God, we have this question. He says, but we can't do that, so therefore we can't really... So it sounds a bit like a cop-out, and indeed the Ravid, who often criticises Maimonides, Rabbi Avraham ben David, criticised Maimonides, he often, he says, he's copping out, etc. But the truth is, philosophically, this is good. It's interesting. I remember the Sfas Emes was once asked for someone once asked the Sfas Emes, one of the Rebbes of Ger, he said, can you bring me a proof of God's existence? And the guy said, of course. The Sfas Emes says, yeah, of course. The guy says, what? He says, the Rambam paskins that God exists. The Ravid doesn't argue. I mean, could you get, what more could you want? I mean, it's like unbelievable, right? The Rambam rules that God exists. The Ravid, who pretty much criticise him on almost everything, he doesn't argue, so it's fine. Okay. So, anyway, but nevertheless, the Rambam's view, and the Meir Simcha Rudvinsk in his book Or Sameach, which is a commentary on Maimonides, has a lengthy discussion about this. If you want to look at it on the laws of Teshuvah. But anyway, and along the lines of what Maimonides is saying, we often have the situation where a child, not just a child, but anyone, is capable of asking a question to which they cannot understand the answer. That happens all the time, doesn't it? Your kid asks you, why do the leaves fall off the tree and fall? So what do you answer? You explain to them photosynthesis. You explain to them, you can explain a little bit about photosynthesis and the fact that it creates all these sugars in the leaf, and that's the bond between the leaf and the tree, is that, right, and so on. There's less hours of sunlight because of the tilt of the earth, and so there's less hours of sunlight, and as it comes to fall and winter, etc., less hours of sun means there's less photosynthesis happening. So therefore, there's less, the complex carbohydrates being formed, and then gravity has its impact. The leaf weighs something, whatever. I mean, the kid's going to be like, here we go again. So you could say, well, you could give it a brief, but they can't understand the complete answer to this. They can only understand a little bit. So Maimonides says, here we are, like children, asking this question. We can't even understand the answer. The truth is, we can't even understand the question. So that's Maimonides' way of dealing with it. There are others who have other ways of dealing with it. For example, there are some who say, look, the perspective of time varies depending on the amount of time that you live. Just for example, a fruit fly lives for how long? I don't know. A week, something like 3 days, or the fruit flies live, something like that, right? 3 days. Obviously, if you tell a fruit fly, if the fruit fly had consciousness, you could speak, listen, I'll get back to you tomorrow. That's not exactly, right? He lived for 3 days. You know what I mean? I'll get back to you tomorrow is not... Right? On the other hand, we were in Philadelphia recently, Philadelphia Zoo, there's a tortoise that's there it's actually about one of the giant tortoises at Philadelphia Zoo, I think is 110 years old. In Philadelphia, that means it's lived in Philadelphia 110 years. That's like equivalent to 300 years anywhere else. It's like unbelievable, right? So this tortoise is quite old, right? Now, obviously, the time perception of the tortoise is quite different from the fruit fly. If you can imagine there's a tree in California just 5,600 years old or something like that. If that tree had perception, like something out of the Lord of the Rings, right? So, or the Day of the Triffids. So that tree, that perception of 5,600 years compared to the tortoise and compared to the fruit fly will be radically different. So let's say the stars had consciousness, which Maimonides says they do, but so we know they don't now, but whatever, right? So if the stars had consciousness and the stars are around for 20 millions, who knows how long, right, etc. Obviously, their view of time would be radically different. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is infinite, beyond time, beyond time. So that means his comprehension, his understanding, as much as we can understand of our time, it's an instant. So our entire life is nothing compared to, right? Our entire life is nothing compared to certain algae. Our entire lifespan is nothing compared to a tree. Our entire lifespan is nothing compared to a star. Our entire lifespan compared to God. So that means, at what point does God know? Pretty much when I'm doing it. It's all one moment. So he doesn't know before. My knowledge, his knowledge, so to speak, is at the same time as my choice. Because from my perspective, it's all the same. From his perspective, rather, it's all 1 millisecond, 1 nanosecond, the shortest time. You know, as they say, there are shortest time periods. The most famous one is the time between the light turning green and the person behind you tooting in New York. There's a shorter time period than that, which is on a day when there's no tachnun, the time between the chazan ending the repetition of Shemona Esra and someone saying Kaddish. Right, that's really one of the shortest time periods known to mankind. I have a friend who deliberately waits at the end of that so someone can yell out Kaddish. Right, I say, why? He says, Jews have been in exile for so long, they deserve a little simcha. Give him some joy. Let him yell Kaddish. Kaddish, no. Right, so he does it deliberately all the time. Anyway, so that's another way of looking at it. Just the idea of God being above time. That's sort of it's actually mentioned by a few. And then there is the pretty radical view of the Ralbag, who is criticised for this, but he says that God knows it when we do it. In other words, we do it, that causes God's knowledge of it. A lot of people don't like that. That sounds like a limitation on God's omniscience. But anyway, those are some of the approaches that can be taken to that. And there are approaches al pi Kabbalah. There's a book Arba Mea Shekel Kesef. Has a discussion about this towards the end of the book. Rav Dessler has a discussion about it in Kuntrus Bechira, etc. Okay, next challenge, number 4. People will say social sciences have shown that we're creatures of our environment. Culture, socioeconomic class, home environment, schooling, personal experience make us what we are. These are the factors that cause everything we do. Now, here we have to say, I think that's a gross exaggeration of the powers of social science. It has not proven that. Certainly, it is true that these factors have a major impact on our lives, but to the point that they make us completely predetermined and predictable, or predetermined and predictable, two different things, but the degree to which they make us predetermined, that is certainly a gross exaggeration. There are numerous examples of people who have completely broken away from their environment. A child born to a single mother crack addict, and this child is born addicted to crack from the moment she's born, living in a horrific environment, a ghetto. Such a baby could grow up to be, and she did. Oprah Winfrey, who you may disagree with everything she says, which I do, including and the. However, nevertheless, one could certainly not argue with the fact that she has had tremendous achievement, considering where she came from, considering her circumstances of birth, the circumstances of her life now, is incredible achievement. And this is true in many cases. There are children from good neighbourhoods, right, and from good families, and so on and so forth. Equal environment, same DNA, can be identical twins raised in the same environment with the same parents, with the same DNA, for heaven's sakes, can be radically different people, radically different personalities, etc. No doubt it has an impact. And we'll talk about that a little further. Number 5, the people will claim often that science has shown that the brain is merely a physical chemical machine, and as a physical chemical machine, a biological computer, it is therefore something which is predetermined, predictable, all the physical processes that cause the development of the brain and and so on and so forth, those are the factors that determine everything you do. Of course, we would argue that the fact that there are processes that happen in the brain, and the fact that when there is a chemical problem in the brain, the fact when there is brain damage, the fact that there is all type or developmental issues affects the person's decision. Of course, that doesn't mean though that that's where the decisions come from. We would argue, and it can be argued, the brain is not necessarily the source of that essence and that will of the human being. It's rather the conduit for it. So the essence of the human is the neshama, the soul, which is spiritual. The brain is the interface between the spiritual and the physical. If the interface is broken, that doesn't mean the spiritual doesn't exist or has ceased to exist. In the same way that if, let's say, your modem breaks down, the cable broke, whatever, something like that. So you're typing, what? The internet. So would it be correct to conclude that the internet has ceased to exist? The internet has ceased to exist because I cannot access it. Or would you say it could be my modem is messed up? Right? The modem's messed up. The internet hasn't ceased to exist. It's just the connection between your computer and the internet. That has ceased to exist. The same is true of the brain. And in addition, I should point out that there are two major neuroscientists, both actually Roger Penrose of Oxford University and Sir John Eccles. I know that sounds like he's from Monty Python, but he's actually a Nobel Prize winner in brain physiology. But Sir John Eccles, both of them maintain that indeed the brain, the human mind, is inherently not predictable and inherently not predetermined, and something which is actually beyond a mere computational model. So that's how they deal with it, but it certainly hasn't been proved to the contrary, and certainly there are major figures in the world of science in this particular area who would disagree with that as well. Challenge number 6 is asked by Rav Dessler, and it's quite famous in Kuntras Bechira. The challenge here is that if free will is indeed so important in our lives, if free will is indeed so major, why is it that when you think about it, not virtually all, but many of our decisions, many of our actions are not really a result of a decision-making process. They're basically automatic. I'll give you an example. I get on the plane. I do that often. They come over to me and they say, excuse me, they always bring over the kosher meals first in order to exacerbate anti-Semitism. And they say, excuse me, sir, do you order kosher food? Do I sit there and say, oh, shall I say yes, shall I say no? Do I struggle? Maybe I'd like... No, I just like, I just submit to the inevitable horror of American kosher food on the planes, which is just the worst thing in the world. I don't know why. The United States is a very advanced country. The kosher food industry is great. Why they cannot make an edible kosher meal on the plane? It's beyond imagination. I don't get it. Anyway, and it's not like it's not possible. I mean, you get meals from Australia, from Asia, from England. Right? They're delicious. It's fantastic. Right? Okay, whatever my criticism of America, I'm sorry. But I don't really have a struggle there. There are many things I don't struggle with. Violence is not a big struggle for me. I remember, again, back when I was in the army, so I had a day off in order to do, they call sidurim. So I'm off base, I'm standing at an ATM, I have a gun. I actually had I forgot what it was, Uzi, I think it was. Right, so I got an Uzi, right, and I'm standing there at the ATM, someone cuts in front of me in line. I mean, no, if you're at Citibank on Central Avenue, and there's a guy standing at the ATM with a machine gun, would you cut in front of him? Right? I mean, in Israel, this is totally normal. Right? That guy with the machine gun, hey people, right? Shoot me, So now, I must tell you, it did not enter my mind to shoot him. It wasn't like I'm saying that, shall I? No. There was no struggle whatsoever. I didn't even think of jabbing him in the kidney with the barrel. I did not even think of breaking his clavicle with the butt. Nothing. It didn't enter. Violence did not enter my mind. I had no struggle whatsoever. So now the reason I had no struggle with violence at that point was because of my parents and my upbringing and everything else. So they basically brainwashed me. I'm not a violent person. So whatever. Didn't really struggle. Is that free will? Was that free will? I didn't. It wasn't like there was any temptation. There was no struggle. Where's the free will? It's like an automatic response. I asked kosher food on the plane, no struggle. No nisayon. No free. And by the same token, Rav Dessler says, there are bad things that we do we also don't really have a struggle about. Why? Because they're so way beyond us, we don't even think of them as wrong. Right? Remember I was teaching a class, it was Or Samach in Israel. So, this guy comes in, and from the Kotel, sitting in the class. It's his first class about Judaism. I was talking about Lashon Hara, Chafetz Chaim, and the idea of his writing books about the prohibition of slander, gossip, talking about other people, and the guy starts laughing. And I say, why is this funny? And he says, you can't legislate that. That's human nature. It's like legislating how many times you breathe per minute. It's like ridiculous. Two people get together, you can see them with friends, it is nothing more natural than talking about someone who's not there. But what could be more natural? He says it's ridiculous, you can't legislate that type of stuff. So now, when this guy, I'll give you his name later, but when he speaks Lashon Hara, right, would you say that he's made a free will decision to do the wrong? Well, now he has, because he came to my class. Too bad for him. Right, but anyway, but let's say, but before he came to my class, would you say that he has made a free will decision to transgress the prohibition of Lashon Hara? Evil speech? No, I don't think so. He doesn't even know it's wrong. No idea. So Rav Dessler says, so where's the free will? So Rav Dessler very famously answers with his idea of what he calls Nakudas HaBechira, the point of free will. He says, look, no question, he says, if you look at free will as type like a thermometer, moral thermometer, with the most debased, corrupt person at the bottom and the most elevated, righteous person at the top, he says we're all somewhere on the different scale of that. He says our free will is at the point of intersect of all the stuff that we've been trained to do which is good, and all the stuff which is we don't even realise is bad. So where those 2 points into, that's where the battle line is. He's type of he uses the analogy of the First World War. People have heard of this, the First World War, right? So the First World War, there was trench war. What was trench warfare? You go all the way back to Berlin, there's no war. All the way back to London, occasional Zeppelin, but there's not much of a war, right? Where is the war? There's these two trenches in Belgium, with the Axis troops in one, Allied troops in the other, and the trenches move this way, they move that way. That's where the war is. So Rav Dessler says, with us, there's conquered territory. There's conquered, controlled by the forces of righteousness, the British Empire, right? They've controlled this part. That's the fact that I don't get violent, the fact that I eat kosher, that type of stuff. And then there's stuff which is still under the control of the forces of evil. Right? So those things I don't even think about, subtleties of behaviour, nuances in morality, which I don't think about, they're way beyond me. So where's my free will? Right there in the middle. Right there in the middle. Is this making sense? Right? I'll give you an example. So something from American culture will make it clear to you. Right? You are brought up, you've got this guy who's basically spent his whole life in Newark, New Jersey, Nebuch, right? And he's been brought up he's a member of an American youth group called the Crips. So he's walking along in his hood, and he's got his 9mm Glock pistol in his back pocket. He's got a Balancong, the Filipino butterfly knife in his left pocket. He's got a set of collapsible steel nunchaku Velcro strap under his leather jacket. That's it's an Okinawan karate weapon, right? And so he's walking along, but he's not hurting anyone. He's taking a stroll, and he sees right next to his crib, it's his house, right? He sees a member of the opposing youth group from the Bloods, member of the Bloods, right? So the member of the Bloods is standing next to his house. Now, what is going through his mind? What's the free will decision that he's struggling with at this point? Anyone tell me? Which weapon to use? No. You are far too nice, right? He's not struggling, shall I kill him, shall I not? He's not like saying, shall I give him directions? He's obviously lost, the poor guy. No! Right? He's saying, shall I use the nunchak? How shall I kill him? So he decides to use the nunchak. So he's advancing on him with the nunchak. He's going to hit him in the temple. Probably kill him, right? The guy, he steps on something. The guy turns around, and as he turns around, he sees that he was a guy that he was his best friend throughout elementary school. They grew up together. They went through elementary school together. They were best friends. They played together. They went different directions, right? They graduated elementary school. They went different directions. One the Crips, one the Bloods, right? So he decides in that moment, instead of going for the temple, he goes for the collarbone. Right, instead of the lateral, bam, like the right, and breaks his collarbone. Good decision or bad decision? You wouldn't say it's like a good decision, because like you see someone in shul you don't recognise, breaking his collarbone is not appropriate. You don't have to give him an aliyah, but right. So on the other hand, right, for where he is on his scale on the moral thermometer, right, his struggle is with things like murder, violence, mayhem. We can't even identify with him because we're the type of like, thank God, we're up there. We don't struggle with that type of stuff. We struggle with, I walk into shul, is the first thing I say, good Shabbos, or is the first thing I say, excuse me, that's my seat? That's something maybe we can identify a little more with, right? So I remember we had a guy in Toronto. I was working for Orsamach in Toronto, Thornhill. This is a guy who had been involved in Christianity. And he was coming back to Judaism a little bit. We were trying to, and I said, what? He said, you know what? When I was about 17, I started to get interested in religion. I started to think about religion. So, I went to a Reform temple. And, the rabbi's speech was completely about politics. And really left-wing politics, which really didn't touch me. He says, no one actually was praying. He says it was very empty. I said, and then he says, then I went to a conservative synagogue. And he says no one was very friendly to me. And he says, and the prayers were not very inspiring. It was just very formal and cold. He says, and then I went to an Orthodox synagogue. And I said, okay, I'm like, that's right. He says, and then the Orthodox synagogue, the first thing someone said to me was, that's my seat. I said, okay. I said, take your stupid seat. And he says, I went to a Jews for Jesus synagogue. They were welcoming. They were singing. No politics, only religion. He says, very nice. They had bagels. So it's very sad. So, but again, that's where our free will is. Right? I have to put that in because we're Project Inspire. So anyway, but that's where we are, right? That's the free will type of scale. So what the Rav Dessler says is this: look, your upbringing, your genetics, your environment, all that type of stuff, that just moves where you are on the scale. But he says, and every person has different levels of free will, and sometimes it could be we're on different levels of the thermometer regarding different areas of life. Could be between my relationship with God, I'm here, relationship with man, I'm down there. Maybe sometimes some people's relationship with man is there, relationship with God's down there. Each one, we have to struggle with that and move it. And the idea is to move that, to keep moving. Rav Nachman of Bretzl puts it this way, he says, the purpose of free will is to eliminate your free will. Purpose of free will is to, what does he mean? Hard to know, but I'm guessing that the purpose of free will is so that I will use my free will to keep moving it up the scale to the point where it's almost indistinguishable. The decisions I'm making are so elevated and refined that I'm never actually deciding between good and bad. You know what I'm deciding between? Good and better than. Yeah? And that's actually Rav Moshe Shapiro, my teacher, he pointed out, he says that on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, that's the job, is to step back and to look at where you are on that scale. And he says that an evil person is defined as someone where the most of their decisions are between the lesser of two evils. Injure him or kill him. Okay? So this guy is a Rasha, meaning, but he's living in an area, I don't mean geographical, but he's living in a moral area where his decisions are never good and bad, or his decisions are between the lesser of two evils. So I think it's great if he decides for the lesser of two evils, but what he needs to do is keep moving it up. Then the Beinoni, the intermediate, such a person's decisions are between good and evil. Our job is to become a tzaddik. What's a tzaddik? Highest level is where your decisions are between good and better than. I remember as a student in yeshiva in Israel, Itri, so one of our teachers, who's a total, what we call a masmid. I mean, he was always learning Torah, always. It's like, it doesn't matter. It was unbelievable. Right? So totally focused, always learning Torah. So it was our first vacation coming up, Bein Hazmanim, the vacation, and it was the last class before vacation. So he walks in, his name's Reb Meltzer, he walks in and he says, I love Bein Hazmanim, I love vacation. We're like, shocked, horrified, it's unbelievable. Reb Meltzer, all he does is learn and he says, I love it. And he sees our puzzlement and he says, I can learn any Masechta I want. Means vacation time, he can learn any tractate of the Talmud that he wants. Right? He's not restricted to learning what the yeshiva wants him to teach. He can learn any tractate he wants. For him, so we're thinking to ourselves, this is a classic example. We're like here. We're thinking, where am I going to say? Eilat, Shall I go to the kibbutz? Hiking? And what's Rebelza thinking of? Which tractate shall I cover during vacation time? Like it's a different level. So our job is actually to keep moving it up. I mean, you could do that in two ways, revolution and evolution. Evolution is every time you make the right decision, it makes it a little easier to make the right decision the next time. So evolution, saltationist evolution, right, not hopeful monsters, is every time you make the right decision, it makes it a little easier to make the right decision the next time. Revolution is sometimes we come to decisions which are revolutionary. Right, where I live, who I marry, what's my job going to be, right? These are revolutionary. These are decisions which can either move you up and down the scale radically in major ways. Okay, so that's how Rav Dessler deals with that idea. Now, that is challenge number 6 and the response. Number 7. We have time. When's this supposed to finish? I haven't got a clue. Okay, so I'll just keep going forever. What? 12:20. Oh, so we have 4 minutes. Okay, fine. So there was a Methodist minister in Minnesota who once gave he was very well known for long sermons, and he was giving his sermon in church, and he sees a guy get up and leave during the middle of his sermon, and towards the end of the sermon, the guy comes back in, and he's had a haircut. So he's, at the end of prayers, he's standing outside greeting the Balabatim, and he says to this guy, he says, "I don't believe it. You left in the middle of my sermon to get a haircut?" And the guy said, "At the beginning, I didn't need one." So anyway, so number 7 is this: does free, and this we really don't have time to deal with in depth, but I'll just, not that we've dealt with anything in depth here, but the question here is, what about a righteous? Does human free will have power? What is the extent of human free will? And here is a major argument amongst Jewish authorities, philosophers, as to the maximum free will versus minimum free will, the maximalist and the minimalist. So the minimalists, the Chovas Halvavos, Rabbi Ibn Pakuda and others, and the Sefer HaChinuch, would maintain that even human free will has no power to harm you if God has not decreed it upon you. That an evil person cannot harm the hair of a head of a righteous person if it was not decreed, even though he has free will. It's just, he's punished for the decision he makes. And the decision he makes is what he gets punished for, but the outcome is beyond his capacity, beyond free will. The other view, which is the Or HaChaim and the Zohar, would say the following: would say that that no, human free will has the power to hurt or help another person, even though it was not decreed upon them from heaven. Okay, and it's quite a radical. But we find a couple of some evidence both ways. Sefer HaChinuch says the prohibition against taking revenge is based on the idea of the minimalist free will idea. Right? He says, why? Because he says, the fact that this guy succeeded in hurting you, he says, he just made the wrong decision. He says, but it's not his fault that you got hurt. You got hurt because God allowed it to happen because you deserve it. He says, so you should be looking into yourself, how you can change yourself, rather than looking at that guy. God will punish him because of his decision, etc. The other way, proof on the other direction, is from the case of Yosef. Right? Yosef's brothers see him coming. They say, here's the guy with the coat, let's kill him. And it says, the Torah says, Vayishma Reuven, Reuven heard, and he saved Yosef from the brothers. Vayishma Reuven, Vayatzilei, the Torah testifies that Reuven saved the brothers, saved Yosef from the hands of his brothers. What did Reuven say to do instead of killing him? Anyone? Chuck him in the pit. No, he didn't say that. He said, chuck him in the pit. The Torah alludes to this idea that the pit was full of snakes and scorpions. So, don't kill him, throw him in the pit of snakes and scorpions. Question here. Hands up, anyone who'd like to be saved by Reuven. Don't kill him quickly. Let him die of scorpion sting, snake bite, contusions, abrasions, dehydration, exposure, etc. I mean, pleasant. Horrible. Are you kidding me? Right, so how is he saving him? So the Zohar says, on that verse, the Zohar's Jewish mystical text, right, The Zohar says that always you should pray to fall into the hands of your enemy, into the hands of snakes and scorpions, rather than into the hands of your enemies, because it says to be saved from enemies who are free will agents. That requires major divine intervention, because he's intervening with free will, which is at the center of the reason of the universe and the existence, etc., is to have an environment for free will. He says for God to intervene in that, the person has to have huge, major merit. But to intervene in snakes and scorpions, which are not free will agents, he says that is a minor intervention, minor miracle, not a big deal. If you're innocent, God will save you. You just need to be innocent. You don't need to be a tzaddik. Yosef, indeed, according to the Zohar, and this is how the Or HaChaim understands it, Yosef would not have been saved from his brothers had the brothers really decided to kill him. His neck would not have turned to alabaster. The knife would not have turned to rubber, right? They would have succeeded in killing him. Reuven indeed actually saved him, because he took him from the hands of free will agents and delivered him to the hands of non-free will agents, and consequently making his salvation happen. Is this clear so far? And we actually say a verse similar to this every morning virtually. Vayomer David el Gad. And King David said to God, what happened is King David had done a sin. The prophet Gad, Gad is a prophet. In America you think I'm saying God. Right, I'm not referring to God, but to a prophet Gad. Right, I know Americans would have a hard time distinguishing between God and God. Anyway, so the prophet Gad comes to King David, and he says, okay, you're going to get punished. Here's the choice: plague, famine, or deliver into the hands of your enemies. Right. So what does King David say? He says, "Vayomer David el Gad, sarli ma'od." This is extremely distressful. However, he says, Niplana biyad Hashem, let me fall into the hands of God. Ki rabim rachamav, his mercy is abundant. Uviyad adam, into the hands of people. Alepola, let me not fall into the hands of people. Anything but that. So it's interesting, but and there are major arguments about this, but at least we see that the power of free will is quite great. And let me end with the fact that just in the same way, midat tova meruba, that according to everyone, certainly if I have free will, and I have in my capacity of my free will to help someone, to do good unto someone, to introduce someone to Judaism, to introduce someone, to be nice to someone, to be helpful to someone, etc., then if you're a maximalist in terms of the free will, you'd say, even if this person doesn't deserve anything good, you know what? I'm still doing it. And certainly if you're the minimalist, I've made the right decision. So either way, you're covered. And if you do something for the benefit of someone else, you certainly can have an impact. Some would say, without you, there'd be no impact. Some would say, impact would have happened anyway, but now you're the vehicle for that, which is good, right? Megalgalin schus al yedei zakai, good things happen through good people. And if you made a decision to do something good, good things will happen through you, and certainly you can have that impact on the world. That's a little bit of a introduction to the idea of free will. The rest is commentary. Go and learn. Thank you for coming and listening, and we will see you around.